In our previous lecture, we had talked about the Chola local self-government, within which, through our analysis of the Uttaramerur inscriptions, we had drawn some insights. First of all, that the system of Chola local self-governance was not imposed from above, rather it was organically developed. During the age of Chola imperialism and the centralization of state power, these local self-governing institutions, assemblies and their committees represented a fine balance between royal and local aspirations. Resulting in a blend of centralization and autonomy. The element of local autonomy manifested in the form of local administration being in the hands of local officials. Further, other than broad guidelines set by the center, the local officials, the representatives of the people, were relatively free of central interference. And this, in fact, is reflected in the wide variety of arrangements of the structure of local governments. तो कोई एक यूनिफॉर्म स्ट्रक्चर नहीं था. These local governments had diverse structures. When it came to the elements of centralization, it was exercised primarily through royal officials being present in the village assemblies on special occasions, land grants made by the center towards Brahmins and temples, the promotion of the temple cult, and finally the use of ideological means to entrench the king's authority in the minds of the common people, namely to promotion of the cult of the god king, okay, or divine theory of kingship. The local self-governing institutions of the Cholas also had an integrative aspect. Not only did they integrate the local centers of power with the central government, but they also integrated the different factions of the rural society and the rural economy, namely the Brahmins, the rich landlords, and the ordinary peasants in a hierarchical structure. Okay? So this resulted in a modicum of social cohesion as well. But because of the unequal distribution of resources, it also became a factor for growing social conflict. And the conflict overpowered the cohesive aspects during the later periods of Chola rule and may have emerged as an important factor for fragmentation and decentralization. Okay? Now, we also discussed whether these Chola self-governing village institutions were actually democratic or not. So, थे democratic या नहीं थे? To some extent they were, but they also had a number of non-democratic, undemocratic elements. It was in the space of this discussion that we also analyzed the instruments of royal control over these autonomous local institutions. ठीक है? तो some of those instruments हमने अभी तुरंत डिस्कस किए हैं, such as royal officials, land grants, temple cult, etc. Apart from this, some other arrangements were also in place. जैसे कि in the Kaveri Delta, all the villages were under direct supervision of royal officials. So वहाँ पे local self-governing assemblies नहीं होती. The military cantonment emerged as a prominent instrument of royal control in the peripheral regions of the kingdom. Okay? So these were the instruments of royal control, and they also contributed to limiting the democratic nature of these Chola self-governing institutions. Why? Because in local self-governing institutions के ऊपर किस तरह की अथॉरिटी का कंट्रोल एस्टैब्लिश किया जा रहा था? A despotic centralized monarchy, right? And therefore their democratic element was being diluted to a certain degree. Although the kings tried to interfere minimally in the affairs of these Chola self-governing institutions, but some degree of intervention was necessary to maintain a basic minimum level of imperial cohesion. ठीक है? तो ऐसा नहीं है कि intervention था ही नहीं, although general policy was of giving maximum autonomy within certain bounds. Okay. Now, continuing the theme of administration further, we also need to analyze the nature of the Chola state. Okay? Now, this has been done by different historians over a long period of time, almost 100 years. 100 साल से इसके बारे में historians अपने अपने ideas present कर रहे हैं. तो सारे historians ने क्या same ideas present किए होंगे? नहीं. Therefore, a rich debate has emerged. The first to study this subject in detail were nationalist historians such as K. A. Neelkanth Shastri, followed by some other nationalist historians such as T. V. Mahalingam, and Appadurai. They have presented a model to explain the nature of the Chola state. क्या बोलते हैं इस मॉडल को? The imperial model. It was presented first by Neelkanth Shastri in the 1930s. It emphasizes that the Chola state was a highly centralized state, characterized by a large and effective bureaucracy, with officials being under the control of the king. Power was projected through a large standing army and the resources were vast and were channelized towards the center through a centralized system of taxation. The kings enjoyed not only material, or you can say real power, but also ritual power, right? With the promotion of the divine theory of kingship. ठीक है? This means that according to K. Neelkanth Shastri, this highly centralized state was in a position to transmit all its policies throughout the whole of the chain of administration, from the highest levels to the lowest levels. However, it was quite conservative in the exercise of this power, right? And the Chola administration was therefore a unique blend, a unique mix of a highly centralized state with well developed, autonomous, local bodies. ठीक है? So according to this set of historians, the autonomy enjoyed by the local bodies was a conscious choice exercised on the part of the kings. अगर वो चाहते तो इस autonomy को crush कर सकते थे. They chose not to do it. ठीक है? So this is one point of view. क्या है ये? Imperial model. Now this point of view continued almost unchallenged till the 1970s, when Bertenstein raised a strong challenge against it. क्या बोला है इसने? He rejected the highly centralized model presented by the nationalist historians by first of all pointing out the dichotomy or the contradictions within it. So what is the biggest dichotomy जो यहाँ पे दिख रहा है आपको? अगर हाईली सेंट्रलाइज्ड है तो ऑटोनोमस लोकल यूनिट्स कोएग्जिस्ट नहीं कर सकते हैं, ठीक है? दैट इज सेंट्रलाइजेशन वर्सेस local autonomy. Second charge that he leveled against the nationalist historians is that they neglected the linkages that exist between the society, economy and polity, ठीक है? So according to Bertenstein, the political structure of the Chola state could not have been a highly centralized one because of the distinctly localized development of the society and the economy. ठीक है? तो क्या बोला है इसने? The economy was largely agrarian and the production classes constituted of lineage-based, well-consolidated communities who had a strong regional identity. तो ये जो हाईली सेंट्रलाइज्ड मॉडल है इसके साथ मैच नहीं कर रहा था, ठीक है? सो बोथ वर एंटीथेटिकल टू ईच अदर. Third allegation that he leveled against the nationalists, that they were relying heavily on the imperialist Eurocentric historiography. अब ये जो imperialist Eurocentric historiography है, this had already created a notional framework of what a modern empire looks like. तो उसमें क्या क्या elements होते हैं? A fixed, well-defined territory, the presence of a single imperial center, the presence of a large and differentiated bureaucracy, and the presence of a large military with a unified taxation system. And the nationalist historians tried to apply this Eurocentric model of an empire to a pre-industrial Indian empire like the Cholas had. Okay? So, in essence, the nationalists had tried to apply the characteristics of modern nation states and empires to the Chola state. Now, this process was always going to be resulting in inaccurate analysis. And finally, the nationalist historians also were consumed by a nationalist fervor in their desire to glorify the Cholas they lost objectivity and overlooked some important detail. Okay? So their writing was not unbiased, it was rather biased. And on the basis of such parameters, इन्होंने चोलास की हिस्ट्री को, उनके एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव स्ट्रक्चर को, द नेचर ऑफ देयर स्टेट, सब कुछ मिस इंटरप्रेट किया है. So this is Bernstein's challenge to the highly centralized model. अब केवल चैलेंज कर देगा तो काम बन जाएगा? नहीं, पूरा का पूरा मॉडल तो उसने डिकंस्ट्रक्ट कर दिया है. Therefore, he gave an alternative model known as the segmentary state model. ठीक है. Now the segmentary state model really actually was not developed by him. It was developed by a British anthropologist Aidan Southall in the context of some African tribal states. ठीक है. Now, what is the basic predicate of this model? तो यहां पे कुछ assumptions होते हैं. Two basic assumptions. First of all, a pyramidal division of the territory and authority of the state among different segments. ठीक है. तो according to Southall, such a state does not have a well-defined or fixed territory. Rather, इसको इस तरह से perceive करना चाहिए. Let us suppose this is the king and his government in the center. इसको capital मान लो, right? He is going to exercise direct control over a limited region in the immediate neighborhood of his capital, of the center. The other portions of the regions who accept his overlordship are going to enjoy a great degree of autonomy. ठीक है. So these are going to be almost autonomous or semi-autonomous segments within the region that accepts the king's or chief's sovereignty. एक तो ये चीज है. एंड इनका अरेंजमेंट कैसे होगा? इस तरह से. ठीक है. So while all of them accept the overarching authority of the king, power is actually shared between these segments. Okay, at every segment or at every level there is a great degree of autonomy. तो मान लो यहाँ पे जो चीफ है, he enjoys the right to issue and extract taxes. This right is shared with the immediate superior who has a similar relationship with his immediate superior. ठीक है, एंड सबसे ऊपर कौन आ जाएगा? जो चीफ है, ट्राइबल चीफ और द किंग इन द केस ऑफ द चोलास. सेकेंड assumption is the division of sovereignty into two. One has been described as sacral kingship or ritual sovereignty, and the other has been described as real kingship or real sovereignty. ठीक है, real kingship depends upon bureaucracy, coercive power or military, and taxation. ठीक है, according to Southall, in the context of the Alur tribe of Africa, the chief enjoyed real kingship only in his personal domain, the central region. All right, whereas as the distance between the center and the other regions kept on increasing, the real kingship, real power of the king kept on declining, and the real mode of consolidation became religious in nature, sacral kingship. And this involves the ideological acknowledgement of the elites in the intermediate and peripheral regions of the sacred nature of the office of the chief. Okay, so they do continue to contribute some taxes or tributes. They may also help the king through military support, but is this support going to be reliable in nature? नहीं, it is going to be sporadic. इसका वॉल्यूम कैसा होगा? कम होगा, because the king is not in a real position to extract these things from the intermediate or peripheral regions. ठीक है, ये किसने बताया था? साउथहॉल ने. In the context of India or in the context of Africa? Africa. Now it was finally applied to South Indian polities, including not only the Cholas but also Vijayanagar. ठीक है, now while applying it to the Indian context, in the context of the Cholas, some characteristics were highlighted. क्या characteristics? Sacral kingship promoted through the temple cult, right? The presence of nadus as autonomous segment. The society and state were defined as a peasant society and peasant state. And when it came to the bureaucracy, what was Bertenstein's take? Did he accept the idea that the Cholas had a large, elaborated, and highly centralized bureaucracy? No. He concluded that there was an overlap of bureaucratic functions as well as functionaries. Okay? So the same set of officials served both the central as well as local governments, the nadus. In many cases, the functionaries at the nadu level were incorporated into the imperial bureaucracy, but they functioned not as instruments of central control over the nadus, rather they functioned as instruments of local control over the center. Okay? Further, he concluded that the revenue income of the state, large or small, was meager due to the absence of revenue centralization. He attacked another pillar of the highly centralized imperial model by arguing that the Cholas did not have a large standing army, and that military power was consolidated in the hands of the local chiefs. And since the state was revenue poor, it was forced to augment its resources through the instrument of warfare and loot, tribute. So, tribute and booty constituted the bulk of royal income. ठीक है? So these are the arguments that he has made. So बताओ, did he support the idea of a highly centralized imperial system? No. He has in fact argued in favor of a decentralized state. Held together by a series of compromises, ideological notions and arrangements. ठीक है? However, as soon as Stein came up with his theory, it immediately received scathing criticism. किस तरह का criticism? First of all, Aidan Southall, who introduced the segmentary state model, said that it was introduced in the context of a small, rather undifferentiated African tribal society. ठीक है? And hence it should not be applied to the highly differentiated Tamil society. ठीक है? तो एक criticism है that the societies that this model was applied to should not have been a highly differentiated one, rather it should have been a rather flat one. Tribal society में तो काम कर जाएगा, यहाँ पे काम नहीं करने वाला है. Second criticism is in Burtonstein's analysis of the Chola society and state as a peasant society and peasant state. Now, a peasant society is one where peasants enjoy uncontested rights over land and its प्रोड्यूस. ठीक है? तो इनके पास लैंड को टिल करने का, उसके नेचर को चेंज करने का और उससे जो प्रोड्यूस हो रहा है उसको अप्रोप्रिएट करने का अनलिमिटेड राइट है. इज दिस ट्रू इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ चोला सोसाइटी? नो, इट इग्नोर्स फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल the established practice of land grants which resulted in the creation of superior rights over the rights of the peasants. तो उनके जो rights हैं उनके ऊपर superior rights को ये देने के लिए यूज किया जाता है land grants. Secondly, it ignores the highly divided and differentiated nature of the peasantry. So, did all peasants belong to the same community? Did they have the same status and the same power? नहीं. तो इनके बीच में भी ऊंच नीच का पापड़ा होता था, right? And therefore, it would be inaccurate to describe the Chola society as a peasant society. Further, While it is true that the bulk of the state income during the Chola period came from the agricultural process, the idea that it was a peasant state means that the entire surplus that was being generated remained localized. इसको center की तरफ channelize नहीं किया जा रहा था. However, this is inaccurate, especially in light of inscriptional details. For example, Raj the First, what did he do? He carried out survey and measurement as for assessment of land revenue. This was also repeated by Kullutunga the First, later on about a century after Raj the First. So by the 11th and 12th centuries, the Chola state no longer remained a peasant state. Revenue centralization was an important process that was going on. Secondly, it also ignores the political reorganization undertaken by these rulers in order to centralize control. Above the Nadus, which were organically developed autonomous regions, इन्होंने क्या बनाए? Valnadus, और उनके ऊपर मंडलम्स in order to supervise the activities of the elites at the Nadu level. तो ये सारी चीजें इग्नोर करके यहाँ पे अज्यूम किया गया है कि जो चोला सोसाइटी था दैट वाज अ पेजेंट सोसाइटी एंड द चोला स्टेट वाज अ पेजेंट स्टेट. दैट इज इनएक्यूरेट. ठीक है, सॉरी. थर्ड क्रिटिसिज्म क्या है? दैट फॉर एनी large empire, both for the process of formation or expansion and sustenance, the basic requirement is a fixed source of income. Now, is war booty or tribute a reliable source of fixed income? नहीं है. ठीक है, they are dependent upon continued military superiority and increasing military expenditure. And therefore, another miscalculation had been made by Bertenstein when he said that the state did not have a large and well and effective, well organized taxation system. Raj the First had in fact set up a separate revenue department. ठीक है, so revenue department existed with a series of officials hierarchically arranged from top to bottom, and survey and measurement was introduced to centralize control and control the revenue rights of local chiefs. While collection remained the responsibility of local officials oversight was maintained on these local officials by designating their domains or nadus as subdivisions within larger revenue units known as Valnadus. Clear है इतना? Another shortcoming of the segmentary state model was pointed out by हरबंस मुखिया. इन्होंने क्या बोला? That Stein had made a mistake by applying the model of sacral kingship in the Indian context. So traditionally, the Indian theory of kingship is a blend of real and ritual sovereignty. In fact, ritual sovereignty is seen as part and parcel of the notion of Indian kingship, and thus the two should not be treated separately. Okay? And this is true while analyzing the history of Indian kingship. This idea has existed since the period of Ashok, who was the first to experiment with the idea of the divine origin of kingship. Adopting the title Devanampiya, which means that the king proclaimed that he was favored by the gods, thus legitimizing his rule. It was further strengthened under the Kushans, who strengthened this concept by adopting titles such as Devputras or the sons of God. So the association between God and king was now more direct. The Guptas took this one step forward by saying that not were they simply the descendants of gods but living gods, by adopting titles such as Param Vishnu, The same trend continued in the post-Gupta period also. So Rajput rulers adopted titles such as Hari, Gopal, etc. ठीक है? So this was nothing new in the context of Indian history. And in fact, the kings depended upon the ritual aspect of kingship to legitimize their rule. और ये एंशियंट या मेडिवल हिस्ट्री में नहीं होता था, अभी भी हो रहा है. इलेक्शन के पहले आप लोगों ने देखा होगा कि सारे कैंडिडेट्स जाते हैं मंदिर, मस्जिद, दरगाह, राइट. कोई कोई गुफा में जाकर के बैठ जाता है. व्हाई डू दे डू दैट? बिकॉज दे वांट टू कन्विंस द पीपल दैट भगवान का हाथ उन्हीं के ऊपर है. एंड if भगवान का हाथ उनके ऊपर है तो आपकी उंगली भी उनके बटन पे लगनी चाहिए, राइट. सो दैट इज द आइडिया. एनीवे, तो इसका ये क्रिटिसिज्म है सेगमेंटरी स्टेट मॉडल का. अब ये बताओ कि अगर क्वेश्चन आता है डिस्कस द सेगमेंटरी स्टेट मॉडल ऑफ बर्टनस्टाइन, can it be applied to the Chola state? तो आंसर हो जाएगा पक्का. कंक्लूडिंग पोर्शन में क्या लिखोगे? कर सकते हैं, नहीं कर सकते हैं? नहीं कर सकते हैं बिकॉज ऑफ इट्स मेनी शॉर्टकमिंग्स, मेनी पुअर अजम्पशंस, मिसकैलकुलेशंस. ठीक है. अब सेगमेंटरी स्टेट मॉडल तो ज्यादातर हिस्टोरियंस ने कर दिया रिजेक्ट, तो कुछ ऑल्टरनेट मॉडल्स दिए गए. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, historians such as Noboru Karashima and Kesavan Veluthat have made the argument that the Chola state was a feudal state, but it was not simply a feudal state, it was a feudal state with a centralizing bias. ठीक है. feudal state with centralizing tendencies. Noboru Karashima is a Japanese historian and he compared Chola feudalism to the Tokugawa shogunate. So Tokugawa shogunate came into existence around 1600 AD in Japan, feudal period of Japan में. ठीक है. तो वहां पे होता क्या था that the emperor who was at the capital did not have actual power. He was simply seen as the ritual authority, and real power was in the hands of the shogun. Shogun was his prime minister, but he was the most powerful feudal lord. Now, different regions of Japan, different prefectures of Japan were under the control of different warlords, different feudal lords known as daimyos. Who were often at war with each other and even conspired against the shogun and the emperor. But the shogunate remained intact क्योंकि इन सब में से सबसे ज्यादा पावरफुल हमेशा शोगुन होता था. तो यहां पर ये तो नहीं बोला है कि एम्परर और शोगुन जैसा कोई अरेंजमेंट था. नोबुरु काराशिमा हैज आर्ग्यूड दैट the Chola emperor was the most powerful of all the warlords. ठीक है, तो in essence Veluthat and Karashima have argued that the Chola state was essentially a form of military feudalism where the king was able to maintain cohesion within his domain only because of his military superiority over the inferior feudal lords, the smaller feudal lords. And as the kings became more and more powerful, they assumed more and more power. Okay? For this, Karashima has analyzed Chola inscriptions, especially official titles and टैक्सेशन सिस्टम. ठीक है, और टाइटल्स और टैक्सेशन सिस्टम से रिफ्लेक्ट क्या होता है दैट यहां पे सम ऑफ द ऑफिशियल्स वर हेरिडिटरी इन नेचर बट they were subordinate to the kings. They accepted the overlordship of the king. They accepted their role as deputies of the king. And taxation system में क्या reflect होता है that these lower level officials, the feudal lords, enjoyed superior rights over the land, over the peasantry. They had the right to extract labor, for example. However, their rights were dependent upon the fulfillment of certain conditions towards the kings. वे free में right नहीं था. It was ensured that they are going to continue enjoying these rights till they remain loyal and continue serving the ruler. ठीक है, तो इसको एक फ्यूडल स्टेट विद सेंट्रलाइज्ड बायस की तरह इंटरप्रेट किया है किसने? काराशिमा एंड केशवन वेलुथाट ने. मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस. नेक्स्ट, some other historians such as Henry J.M. Claassen, Joseph Heitzman, and Y. Subrayallu have simply stated that the Chola state was an early state. In this, the greatest contribution has been made by Heitzman. क्या बोला है इन हिस्टोरियंस ने? That the Chola ruler exercised power through a series of tools including land grants, promotion of the temple cult, promotion of the Shaivite cult, and incorporation of local chiefs into the bureaucracy, along with political reorganization. ठीक है? However, we should never forget that the historical antecedents of the Chola state were basically the emergence of localized agrarian regions and polities. In the context of Chola history, इन regions और polities को क्या बोलते हैं? The nadus. Therefore, any attempt to bring these units under greater central control is always going to create a negative reaction. Natural tendency क्या होगा? Centrifugal. ठीक है? And as a result, the Chola rulers were always in a struggle against centrifugal tendencies. From the 11th century onwards, as the Cholas reached the peak of their power, the degree of centralized control over these local autonomous units kept on increasing, but it was never complete. Okay? So they were never able to fully incorporate these regions. ठीक है? And herein lies a dichotomy between theory and practice. In theory, the Chola rulers viewed themselves and projected their powers as traditional imperial despotic monarchs, much like the Mauryans of the Arthashastra. ठीक है? But in practice, they exercised limited control at the lower levels of administration, which continued to enjoy a great degree of autonomy. ठीक है? And ये जो mismatch है in theory and practice, इसको बोल दिया गया है early state model. ठीक है? That state formation is going on, लेकिन ये complete नहीं हो पाया है. It has never been able to reach its conclusion. So state formation is in early phases of development. Therefore, early state. Clear है इतना? कितने मॉडल्स देख लिए हमने? structure. बीडी चट्टोपाध्याय, इन्होंने कौन सा मॉडल दिया है टू एक्सप्लेन स्टेट फॉर्मेशन? फ्यूडलिज्म के पीरियड में भी हमने कवर किया था, द इंटीग्रेटिव मॉडल. ही हैज अप्लाइड दिस टू द चोला स्टेट एज वेल. क्या बोलते हैं ये? दैट स्टेट फॉर्मेशन in the deep south during the early medieval age was the result of an integrative process which resulted in the integration of political power by stitching together different segments of or different regions of political control into a unified whole, and within this the land grants and pursuit of religious legitimacy played an increasingly important role, and this process additionally involved the element of social integration, involving not simply the integration of newly inducted tribals into the mainstream society through the process of peasantization, and the application of caste-based ranking over them, but also at the upper levels of the society by the formation of a Brahmin Velar alliance. ठीक है? So instead of looking at this process as a thing which would result in ultimate disintegration, this has been used to explain how the Cholas, who emerged as one of the competitors in the context of early medieval age after the decline of Pallava power, they were able to slowly expand their political as well as social power. Okay? They were able to create a large integrated political and social system, and उसके टॉप पे वही. क्लियर? तो ये किसने बताया है? बीडी चट्टोपाध्याय ने. एंड फाइनली we have Radha Champa Lakshmi. What has she done? She has given a balanced and neutral view. ठीक है? While she has said that the Chola state was not a homogeneous state, and the royal ideology kept continuously evolving. So too did the nature of the state. Okay? So nature of the state also kept on continuously evolving in response to the prevailing conditions. Nature of the state also kept on evolving continuously, and therefore she has concluded that the Chola state displayed the elements of all the important models. The centralized imperial model, the feudal model, early state model, segmentary state model, and integrative process of state formation during different phases. तो अलग अलग phases में either one or a combination of several models could be used to best characterize the nature of the Cholas. ठीक है, तो कोई एक सिंगल टर्म या सिंगल ब्रांड हम इसके ऊपर अप्लाई नहीं कर सकते हैं कि चोला मॉडल इस तरह का था. ठीक. नाउ इन द स्टेट ऑफ दिस कंफ्यूजन एक और कंसर्न इमर्ज होता है, दैट इज इट एक्चुअली इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर अस टू आइडेंटिफाई द एग्जैक्ट नेचर ऑफ द चोला स्टेट, या फिर कुछ और क्वेश्चन पूछना. Some alternative questions should be asked, क्योंकि हम देख रहे हैं कि अलग अलग फेजेस में अलग अलग मॉडल्स अप्लाई किए जा रहे हैं, राइट. And therefore she questioned the very premise of the debate, arguing that rather than trying to unceasingly analyze the exact nature of the Chola state, some other questions must be investigated. अब इनमें अदर क्वेश्चंस में से सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट क्या आइडेंटिफाई किया राधा चंपा लक्ष्मी ने? नाउ हर मेन focus of study was temple architecture during the Chola period. So she wondered how was it that the Cholas were able to organize resources at such a large scale to undertake such monumental construction. तो पैसा, मैन पावर, ये सारी चीजें कहां से लेकर के आ रहे थे, ऑर्गेनाइज कैसे कर रहे थे? दैट इज द रियल क्वेश्चन दैट नीड्स टू बी आंसर्ड. So she emphasized that historians should shift their focus towards the means by which the Cholas organized resources to undertake temple construction at a monumental scale. ठीक है, तो ये बोला है. Clear? And this is the existing debate regarding the nature of the Chola state. टोटल हमने कितने पॉइंट्स ऑफ व्यू देखे हैं? 6 पॉइंट्स ऑफ व्यू देखे हैं. कैन वी रिकॉल देम क्विकली? द इंपीरियल मॉडल, उसके बाद सेगमेंटरी स्टेट मॉडल, फॉलोड बाय अर्ली स्टेट मॉडल, फॉलोड बाय फ्यूडल स्टेट मॉडल, फॉलोड बाय इंटीग्रेटिव मॉडल, एंड फाइनली क्वेश्चन ही चेंज कर दिया गया है. एक बार बोला गया है कि द नेचर ऑफ द चोला स्टेट, अगर ये क्वेश्चन पूछा जा रहा है, आंसर इज नॉट गोइंग टू बी स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड. नेबुलस हिस्ट्री था. एट डिफरेंट पॉइंट्स ऑफ टाइम द चोला स्टेट अज्यूम्ड डिफरेंट कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स. इट वाज एट समटाइम्स सेंट्रलाइज्ड, समटाइम्स फ्यूडल, समटाइम्स एन अर्ली स्टेट, समटाइम्स अ सेगमेंटरी स्टेट, and at other times it was the result of integrative state formation. However, the real question is कि चोलास अपने रिसोर्सेज को मोबिलाइज किस तरह से कर रहे थे, स्पेशली द मैसिव रिसोर्सेज दैट वर नीडेड फॉर टेम्पल कंस्ट्रक्शन एट अ मॉन्यूमेंटल स्केल. टेक डाउन अ क्वेश्चन. Analyze the different models presented for explaining the nature of the Chola state. Do you think that it was highly centralized? Question mark. $200 words, 15 marks. क्वेश्चन समझ तो आ गया होगा, राइट? प्रॉब्लम क्या होता है, इसको अप्रोच कैसे करना है, स्ट्रक्चर कैसे बनाना है इसका. तो सबसे पहले तो इंट्रोडक्शन, किसके बारे में बात करना चाहिए? सबसे पहले तो आपको ये बताना पड़ेगा दैट दिस इज अ मैटर ऑफ हिस्टोरिकल डिबेट, और कई सारे मॉडल्स प्रेजेंट किए गए हैं ओवर अ लॉन्ग पीरियड ऑफ टाइम. द फर्स्ट ऑफ देम द इंपीरियल मॉडल. तो क्या क्या बताना होगा आपको यहां पर इसके बारे में? the proponents the features एंड फाइनली इस वाले पोर्शन को एड्रेस करना होगा, ठीक है, इट्स वीकनेसेस और क्रिटिसिज्म्स और लिमिटेशंस। एंड इस वाले पोर्शन को कंक्लूड करने के समय यू विल हैव टू प्रेजेंट सम कंक्लूडिंग स्टेटमेंट्स। किस तरह के कंक्लूडिंग स्टेटमेंट्स दे सकते हैं हमने पिछली क्लास में डिस्कस किया था कि कोई भी इंपीरियल सिस्टम कंप्लीटली सेंट्रलाइज्ड कभी भी नहीं हो सकता है, ठीक है, इट इज प्रैक्टिकली इम्पॉसिबल और देयर आर प्रैक्टिकल लिमिटेशंस to complete centralization, ठीक है। तो ऑल्दो क्वेश्चन में पहले बोला गया है कि सारे मॉडल्स के बारे में बात करो, फिर उसके बाद असेस करो वेदर इट वाज हाईली सेंट्रलाइज्ड और नॉट, लेकिन अगर हम इस तरह से करेंगे ना तो एक तो हमारे क्वेश्चन का फ्लो ब्रेक हो जाएगा एंड टाइम और स्पेस बहुत ज्यादा कंज्यूम होगा, जो कि दोनों ही आपके पास कमी रहती है पूरे टाइम, ठीक है। एंड आफ्टर दिस यू विल देन प्रेजेंट ऑल्टरनेटिव मॉडल्स, फिर उसके बाद आप बात करोगे सेगमेंटरी स्टेट की, लेकिन इसको पूरा इलैबोरेट नहीं करने की जरूरत है, यू विल सिंपली एनालाइज द फीचर्स ऑफ द सेगमेंटरी स्टेट एज सजेस्टेड बाय बर्टनस्टाइन एंड इट्स वीकनेसेस। फीचर्स में हमने 5 या 6 फीचर्स देखे थे और 4 या 5 वीकनेसेस देखे थे। नाउ यू विल हैव टू बी वेरी सिलेक्टिव कि आप किस तरह का इंफॉर्मेशन यहाँ पे सप्लाई करते हो, राइट। मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट फीचर जो है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल सैक्रल किंगशिप, पिरामिडल डिवीजन ऑफ पावर, एब्सेंस ऑफ फिक्स्ड टेरिटरी, एब्सेंस ऑफ स्टैंडिंग आर्मी, an irregular taxation system, dependence on war booty, इस तरह से आपको छोटे छोटे फ्रेजेस के थ्रू अपना आंसर यहाँ पे आर्गुमेंट्स करने पड़ेंगे। लॉन्ग रैम्बलिंग सेंटेंसेस यू कैन नॉट अफोर्ड टू राइट। और ऐसे ही इसके काउंटर आर्गुमेंट में वीकनेसेस को दिखाने के लिए आपको सिमिलर चीजें अप्लाई करनी पड़ेंगी। वीकनेसेस दिखाने के लिए आप ये भी कर सकते हो कि 2 या 3 पॉइंट्स को एक में मर्ज करके बता दो, ठीक है। देन यू आर गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट दी feudal state model, the early state model and the integrative model, ठीक है। लेकिन अगर आपने ध्यान से सुना होगा एंड इफ यू हैव अंडरस्टूड द आर्गुमेंट्स दैट वी हैव मेड, तो इन तीनों मॉडल्स में कई सारी सिमिलैरिटीज हैं, राइट। Many of the tools that these models rely upon to analyze the nature of the state are one and the same. For example, हर एक मॉडल में हमें क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? Some shared characteristics, a hierarchical relationship between the center and local chiefs. तो ये आप यहाँ पे तीनों में कॉमन पाते हो। फ्यूडल स्टेट मॉडल क्या बोल रहा है? मिलिट्री फ्यूडलिज्म के ऊपर फोकस कर रहा है। अर्ली स्टेट मॉडल क्या बोल रहा है? इट फोकसेस अपॉन सेंट्रलाइजिंग टेंडेंसीज विद इन अ फ्यूडल बैकग्राउंड। एंड इंटीग्रेटिव मॉडल क्या बोल रहा है? दैट थ्रू लैंड ग्रांट्स एंड परस्यूट ऑफ रिलीजियस लेजिटिमेसी अ प्रोसेस ऑफ पॉलिटिकल इंटीग्रेशन टुक प्लेस। तो जैसा यहां पे बोल रहा है उसका एग्जैक्टली उल्टा। तो आप इन तीनों को एक साथ क्लब कर दो, ठीक है। एंड यहाँ पे you will highlight the similarities, such as the presence of a hierarchical relationship, the ability of the center to coercively or to coerce obedience from the lower levels of administration, and the pursuit of religious legitimacy. ठीक है, तो इसको वर्ड कैसे कर सकते हो आप? That historians such as Karashima, Heitzman and B.D. Chattopadhyay have explained the Chola state in terms of the feudal, early and integrative state models respectively, with the shared characteristics of a hierarchical relationship existing between the king and the local chiefs, or between the center and lower levels of power, the ability of the center to coerce obedience from the lower levels, and the pursuit of religious legitimacy through the promotion of the temple cult by the kings. ठीक है, तो वो जो करीब 200-300 वर्ड्स का हमारा डिस्कशन था उसको हमने कंप्रेस कर दिया है. एंड देन फाइनली वी आर गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट द आइडियाज ऑफ our Champaka Lakshmi, right, where she has given a balanced and neutral approach or neutral analysis while focusing upon the chronological evolution of the Chola state to put forward a complex picture which prompted a major directional shift in the debate. Wherein she emphasized the need to turn towards or turn the focus towards the means of Chola power and ability to mobilize resources. ठीक है, कंक्लूजन में क्या लिखोगे? The debate regarding the nature of the Chola state is therefore closed or still remains open? Still remains open. However, some things we can say with certainty. However, irrespective of the exact nature of the state, it was able to undertake political and cultural activities at a grand scale, and the Chola period represents the most glorious phase of Indian history, represents one of the most glorious phases of Indian history. ठीक है, so on this note we may conclude. Clear है? So we need to be very careful about the information that we choose to present and the wording of our arguments. हमारा objective क्या है कि पूरे के पूरे discussion को we should have the ability to compress it into limited words and in a limited space and time. और उसके लिए जरूरी क्या चीजें होती हैं? एक तो सारी चीजें आपको याद होनी चाहिए. Only then will you be able to actually write an answer, a good answer to such a question. ठीक है. Second thing, not only should you remember it, but आपको ये समझ में भी आना चाहिए, so that you can change the way in which you present it. वो याद करने का मतलब तो केवल रटना हो जाता है, याद करके समझना भी important होता है. तो उसके लिए दो चीजें हैं. एक तो रिवाइज करो एंड फोकस ऑन आंसर राइटिंग. आंसर्स लिखने की प्रैक्टिस आपकी जितनी ज्यादा बढ़ती जाएगी, you will be forced more and more as you come across more and more analytical questions to analyze the knowledge that you have already absorbed. और जब वो analytical skills आपकी develop हो जाएंगी, तो many of these arguments you will be able to remember as they are, but you will be able to make new analyses on the spot without much difficulty. That is a learned skill. Once again I am saying कि answers लिखने चालू रखिए, बंद मत करिए. ठीक है. आई नो कि टाइम इस समय कम है आप लोगों के पास, लेकिन दिस इज द मोस्ट वैल्यूएबल स्किल दैट यू कैन लर्न इन योर एंटायर प्रिपरेशन प्रोसेस. इस मतलब किताबें तो खैर सभी कोई पढ़ लेता है, लेकिन ये जो स्किल है ना, केवल वो लोग डेवलप करते हैं जिनका रियल चांस होता है सक्सीड करने का, एंड यू वांट टू बी इन दैट कैटेगरी. तो अगर नहीं लिख रहे हैं तो लिखने शुरू करिए. चलिए, तो दिस इज our discussion on the nature of the Chola state. अब एक आध और छोटे टॉपिक्स बचते हैं हमारे मेडिवल इंडिया में. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, सॉरी, एंशिएंट इंडिया में साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी इन एंशिएंट इंडिया, द मेगालिथिक एज, और कुछ बता सकते हो? कंडीशन ऑफ विमेन इन एंशिएंट इंडिया एज अ होल. तो क्या कोई ऐसा पोर्शन रहा है इंडियन हिस्ट्री का जहां पे हमने कंडीशन ऑफ वुमेन नहीं डिस्कस किया है? हर जगह पे डिस्कस कर चुके हैं इसको. पोस्टमॉर्टम में नहीं डिस्कस किया था? क्यों? आई बिलीव कि हमने किया हुआ था डिस्कस कि ये इस पीरियड में मनुस्मृति वगैरह आ रहे थे एंड सम नोशंस रिगार्डिंग वुमेन, ट्रीटमेंट ऑफ वुमेन, दे हैड स्टार्टेड टू चेंज. कंपेयर किया था विद द अर्थशास्त्र. आई रिमेंबर कि किया हुआ है इसको डिस्कस, राइट? तो ये तो हमने डिस्कस कर लिया है. कैन यू थिंक ऑफ एनीथिंग एल्स? कुछ और? वो मेडिवल में आएगा, अर्ली मेडिवल में आता है. चलिए ठीक है. तो इसको हमें और डिस्कस करना है. इफ यू गाइस रिमेंबर एनीथिंग एल्स तो लेट मी नो. एक क्वेश्चन आया है, व्हाट इज द मेजर डिफरेंस बिटवीन सेगमेंटरी स्टेट एंड फ्यूडल स्टेट. और सेगमेंटरी स्टेट में the most important thing that we need to remember is the idea of sacral kingship. ये फ्यूडल स्टेट में नहीं अप्लाई होता था. Although the Cholas projected themselves as god kings, but the feudal state model assumes that the real medium of the transmission of imperial power was their military superiority. So feudal model relies upon the explanation of military feudalism. तो सबसे मेजर तो ये है. सेकंड, जो फ्यूडल मॉडल है ना, वहां पे दी रियल रिलेशनशिप, द सॉवरेनिटी, सॉरी, द नेचर is more official in nature. The nature of the relationship is more official. तो जो official titles हैं और जो superior rights हैं, ये कौन दे रहा है local chiefs को? They are conferred by the king. ठीक है? Once again, it is a feudal model, but it is feudalism that is imposed from above. King की सहमति के बिना ये rights लोग नहीं enjoy करते. So it is a feudal state with a centralizing bias. However, in the intermediate and peripheral regions, जो नाडूज हैं, वहां पे the king has very little real authority, right? तो जो नाडूज हैं, these are organic segments and they have chosen to accept the king as their superordinate chief. तो यहाँ पे the process of state formation is taking place from below, where the chiefs at the local level are simply acknowledging the you can say they are acknowledging the ritual sovereignty of the king. ठीक है? तो feudal state model में process उल्टा है. The status of the feudal chiefs is being confirmed by the kings. So these are the two main differences. क्या क्या? एक तो ritual sovereignty का और दूसरा nature of the relationship between the lower segments of power and the center. ठीक? That is different. ठीक है सुदीप? All right. So I'm ending the class for now. कल के क्लास में हम अगर निखिल सर वापस नहीं आते हैं तो यू विल गेट टू नो बाय दिस इवनिंग. तो कल की क्लास में साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी डिस्कस करते हैं एंड देन उसके बाद मेगालिथिक एज. हाँ, अभी पक्का नहीं है, निखिल सर इन्फॉर्म करेंगे तो उस हिसाब से आपको इन्फॉर्मेशन दे दिया जाएगा. अगर मेरा क्लास होता है तो साइंस एंड टेक डिस्कस करते हैं. हाँ, एक चीज और रह गया था, कलहनाज राज तरंगिनी. ठीक है, तो पहले इसको डिस्कस करेंगे फिर उसके बाद इसको डिस्कस करते हैं. ठीक है, तो फर्स्ट इफ आई हैव क्लास टुमारो कलहनाज राज तरंगिनी, फिर उसके बाद साइंस एंड टेक, फॉलोइंग दैट दी मेगालिथिक एज. इतने में आप लोगों को कुछ और याद आता है, करवाना रह गया है तो वो कर सकते हैं. हाँ, एक रिक्वेस्ट आया था कि गुप्ता पीरियड के जो क्वेश्चंस हैं प्रीवियस ईयर्स वाले, उनमें से कुछ क्वेश्चंस डिस्कस करने हैं, तो लिस्ट प्रिपेयर करके लाते हैं अगले क्लास में. सॉरी, जब ये दोनों हो जाते हैं टॉपिक्स, उनमें से जो रेलेवेंट वाले होते हैं उसको डिस्कस कर लेंगे. ठीक है, चलिए. इज दिस कोट इंडिकेटिंग टू सेंट्रलाइजिंग टेंडेंसी? डाउटलेट इट वाज नॉट अ फ्री स्टेट at as it was any rate a state. Yes, so Shastri has made the argument that even the local self-governing villages were under some degree of royal authority. So this statement is in the context of the local self-governing villages. Okay. चलिए then, thank you for your time. आज क्लास थोड़ा जल्दी खत्म हो गया है, but ये topics नए क्लास में. Anything else?